We're here to talk about success, and you can all be proud of yourselves because you've been labeled successful. But we're startups, and everyone here is still fighting the good fight for their startups. So we're going to talk about how they measure success, and perhaps even go through some secrets or secret stories throughout the paths that they've led on to get to where they are now. So let's start out by talking a little bit about how you might measure success at your Anyone company. I think that may differ, and that's totally fine. Let's start with Michael.
How we measure success. So we're a games company. We make something called Moshi Monsters, and so we look very carefully at metrics, but we're not obsessed about them. I think it's very important to, as an entrepreneur, to trust your gut instinct and to build stuff that you think is going to work, and then test and look at the metrics. But we have an email that goes out to all our key stakeholders every morning and our shareholders with all our KPIs that we track, and that's kind of how we measure success on a sort of numbers basis. But there's a huge amount of other stuff we do as well beyond that. But I'll let the other guys.
You know what, actually, Michael, why don't you tell us a little bit about your... I'm not sure when I'm coming in and out. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your key product, just to put that in context?
Okay, so I'll just give you a little story then about how I got here. I'm much better at failure than success. Many of my early businesses were utter disasters. And this current one, Mind Candy, I launched in 2004 and raised a lot of money, about $10 million. And we created a treasure hunt called Perplexity. And we buried a $200,000 treasure. And people had to solve clues online, mobile, live events, actors, and so forth. And we were told we were the next biggest thing in entertainment. We won awards. Everyone was blogging about us. And we thought we were hugely successful. And I think that's a massive mistake. As soon as you think you're successful, often you fall on your face. So creatively, it was amazing. Commercially, it was a disaster. And we switched to a game called Moshi Monsters, which is the world of adoptable pet monsters, sort of Tamagotchi meets Facebook for kids. And we've grown to almost 60 million registered users. And now we have toys and books and magazines and live tours and music. So we've kind of learned a lot from our dark days and applied that to our new product. And seen both sides of the coin.
So, Jen, tell us a little bit. I'm not sure that people might understand exactly what delivering happiness is. So tell us what that is and what you're hoping to do with it.
Sure. So delivering happiness kind of stemmed from the book by the same name, Delivering Happiness. And I actually think everyone's getting a copy. Let me know if you don't. But
look under your seat.
Yeah, it's like Oprah. Are you guys familiar with Zappos.com? So Zappos.com, the CEO of that, and I worked on the book called Delivering Happiness. And so I have lineage and history at Zappos. I've been a consultant there for about 9 years now. And now, since the book came out, since we had such really, really positive response, and at the end of the day, what the book is about is sort of the evolution of how Zappos grew from a tiny little startup. I always considered Zappos to be my best friend's little brother. You know, when you were in high school, you had a best friend, and they had a little sibling, and when you met them, they're so little, tiny, cute little thing, and then all of a sudden, after a few years, they've grown to this thing, and you just wonder, how did that happen? And that's how I feel about Zappos in a way, and seeing how it evolved from, a typical late 90s startup that really was basing it on, we want to be the biggest online shoe seller in the world, to wanting to focus on customer service and making the hard decisions to be able to get there. And then a couple years later, focusing on realizing that the number one priority should be your employees and focusing on company culture and making investments there. And then another couple years later was the realization of what they were doing overall was delivering happiness to the customers, to the partners, to the vendors, and especially the employees. So that's kind of the basis of the book. And after the book came out, and just as a side note, when we talk about happiness, it's more about the science of happiness and positive psychology. So less about the I'll hold hands and sing Kumbaya kind of happiness, but not that there's anything wrong if you do it. So after that came out, it kind of sort of all gelled this whole idea of what business success might mean on one end and what your higher purpose is for yourself as individuals, but also as a company. And so the research shows then there's sort of a revelation after having this sort of test tube called Zappos and seeing that it really is about having a higher purpose and a strong company culture that makes long-term sustainable brands. So after the book came out, we had such positive response from all over the world, and it was really actually unexpected to see the non-business response where people were saying, I can actually apply these things, these frameworks of happiness based on science, to my personal life and not just a business. There's a lot of parallels there. So at the end of the day, knowing that really if you have a purpose, whether thick or thin with the economy, that will always tend to make you rise.
So great. Sounds like you've thought about this question a lot. That's
well,
it's embedded in the title of what you're doing, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm Jens, I'm founder of Vuga. We started the company 3 years ago, and I think you asked this question regarding how I define success, and or how we define success. And to me, it's really about long-term sustainable growth, about building a company that is there in 10, 20, 30 years, that people are proud of, and especially where employees love what they create. I think that's really, to me, what we try to achieve, to build.
And where might people be familiar with Vuga?
Yeah, so we at Vuga, we do social games. So you will find us on Facebook, especially. And there we have about 37 million active users. So last month, 37 million people played our games. And that makes us number 3 worldwide. So Zynga is number 1, Electronic Arts is number 2, we are number 3. And that's what we do. But also increasingly, we're going mobile. So we're trying to bring social games to mobile. And we're doing more of that this year.
Okay. Alex.
Sure. So SoundCloud. How many people know about SoundCloud? God, that's cool.
You don't have to explain anything, Alex.
Oh,
you can
not all the hands were up. There were quite a few that weren't. So SoundCloud is the world's leading social sound platform. We allow anybody to be able to create sounds in different ways and share those across the web. The idea is basically just to figure out the ways of how people can connect with each other through sounds. And it turns out that sound is a very big part of all of our lives, and there's a lot of interest in that. So that's what we're doing and what we're really interested in. We're trying to make the web a place that has more sound and it's not so silent.
But it's usually music, right, when you say sound?
Not necessarily. We have fantastic artists, like some bigger artists like Lady Gaga or 50 Cent or Madonna, and also other fantastic artists who are just starting off with their first iPad application, clicking around, making their first piece of music. But sound is a lot more than that as well. We have a lot of politicians. What they spend their days doing is a lot giving speeches. It's easy for them to record that and share that with the world for the people who don't happen to be in the audience then. A lot of journalists for recording interviews. We have news updates from The Economist, from The New Yorker. We have parents recording their kids' first words. There's actually a couple of parents who managed to capture the first words of their children. And really, public companies putting up earnings calls. When you start thinking about sound, it's really like phenomenal how many different places of your life and how many places of the world sound plays a key part. So we're trying to figure out, what's sort of the natural state of sound on the web. So we're doing that in many different ways, and I think, to the question of success metrics, I think that it was a great point that there's often more failures than success. So we should maybe do another panel about failures. We could do that one for 8 hours or something. But I think for us, all of the sort of important metrics and measurements basically always come back to the users of the platform. Everything else is in some ways less relevant. So it's a lot about how many people find SoundCloud interesting, how engaging is it, and we try to base a lot of metrics around that. So conveniently enough, we're going to make a little announcement today because it's a really awesome day for us, because we just passed 10 million users, which is really cool. Thank you. And I think that's really at the core of sort of what is important for us, because SoundCloud is a social platform, and without the people using it, it's really it's absolutely nothing. There's really nothing there. Everything, all the sort of magic that comes out of it, comes from those 10 million people. And a while ago, if I would have thought there would be 10 million awesome people creating sound and connecting with that and being really engaged and passionate in this community, I'm not sure I would have, expected that that would be the case. So that's, those are the kind of metrics we look at. Some of the things that sort of led to that was, mobile has been a big part for us. We had over 5 million downloads of our application. SoundCloud is built as a platform. It's not just about the community of sound creators, it's about the community of developers around the platform as well. We've had over 10,000 apps that people are sort of creating around the platform. And then another thing for us is also sort of this whole idea of the breadth of different sound there. And I think today we have over 3.3 million unique tags that people use to describe their sounds. So that could go all the way from new hit single to baby's first words. And that sort of breadth is really important for us because it means that the broader it is, the more people it's relevant for, the more people we can actually have an impact on. So success for us really always comes back to metrics that are connected to the users, their passion and what they do. And so that's been our approach so far. We're starting to add one more element to it now, which I think, is equally, if not even more important than looking at the users, and that's looking at sort of at our own team as well, and sort of team satisfaction, how happy people are. And we're not as advanced yet. We don't really know how we're going to track that and what the best way of doing it is, but we've made that one of our sort of top KPIs for the entire company this year as well.
Great, let's make sure to get to Kaj.
I'm Kaj from Game Duel. And Game Duel is actually in the business of delivering a good time to people. So we are the leading social games community of Facebook. So we have started before Facebook was there. And we get people onto our platform. We form communities around games, and then we let people play them and have a good time. And in terms of success, so we started at a time, we were 3 co-founders, and we started at the time when the .com crash just had happened. So we all had gone through the cycle of ramping up quickly, falling down quickly. And so one of the metrics for success for us was really financial stability. So we want.
I was wondering when someone was going to bring up money.
No, I mean it's the number one reason why startups fail is because they run out of money. But I think that is not a real success. I mean you need it. But what is much more important is really delivering a product that excites the customers. So what does that mean? First, of course, the genius to have a product that customers like. But then the next step, really tuning that product with all the metrics, with retention metrics, with activity metrics, and making sure you really get a product that is so good that they say, I would be crazy if I go somewhere else. I really like this product. And so I think that is very important. But to make that really long-term and long-lasting, what we found is really also the team culture. It is really the culture. So if you look at companies that are very successful, you always see that's exactly it. So they always have a special culture. They have very good values. They have strong values. And this is when the magic happens. So when people visit us at Game Duel, they sometimes come and they say, what is this here? I mean, you feel like a startup and you're already 170 people. How do you do this? And what we do and what we did from the beginning, we really paid a lot of attention that we got the teams together, that we gave them a lot of responsibility. We have a lot of cooperation, very positive way of working together. And that has played out very well up to now, and we think that is really what defines success in the long term. And measurements for these, we do a lot of feedback rounds. So from the beginning, even when we were small, we started with this feedback, and everybody said, wow, why are you doing formalized feedback? I mean, 20 people, can't we talk to each other? But ingraining this culture very early on really made it happen that now we have this culture that we cherish so much.
So I think one of the ways that I most commonly hear startups described as successful is after you exit, right? You go through an acquisition or you go public, in some rare cases. Jenn, I know you weren't necessarily in charge of Zappos, but Zappos did get bought by Amazon. Some of your serial entrepreneurs. How did that kind of an experience influence your personal perception of success in a startup? Go ahead.
how did the acquisition or just the
Yeah, I
exit?
mean, on a day-to-day basis,
Right.
you're measuring success, and a lot of you seem to think by the number of people who are actively engaged with your product.
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes by if you're making money and able to keep your company open. Maybe
Right.
if your employees are happy. But also, these kind of milestones matter a lot when you talk about whether something failed or succeeded.
Yeah. Well, I guess I think it's important. I mean, having gone through the whole, like, from the 90s to where we are today and having seen the cycles and what was important at one time were no longer important and then it came back again. And so it was interesting to see because Zappos started at a time when it was important to have stock options and people were looking for the when are we going to cash out. But realizing that over time that wasn't really their ultimate goal. So it's the intent going in. Some entrepreneurs go in thinking, I just can't wait to get a VC, I can't wait to get a VC, but without realizing that there are a lot of sacrifices once that happens and you lose a lot. I have a lot of examples of that. So at the end of the day, I think what I learned most was that having that intentionality going in really affects the rest of your culture, the rest of your employees, and what they should expect going out. Are you in it for the long term? Are you there for a long-term sustainable brand and a business like, I guess that's why the Amazon acquisition actually worked well for Zappos is because both Jeff Bezos and Tony have a long-term view of where their company wants to go. I guess it's just weighing those parameters of how you're tying your success. Is it really cashing out or is it building a long-term sustainable brand?
What about you, Michael?
Well, we're not public, so I can't answer that question.
Newsflash.
No, not yet. I'd much rather take this company public than sell it. I think it would be heartbreaking because of all the energy and emotion we put into it and all the big dreams we've got. Because you lose control, obviously. You gain a paycheck, but I think a lot of entrepreneurs are running their businesses and building stuff, especially at this special moment in history, to do something incredible and be disruptive and overturn industries that have been static and boring for decades. So, we definitely would term success as building it out for the long run.
I mean, I think it's like, for a lot of people that want the funding or like the exit or something to really be out there, it's a lot about, having to seek like external sort of input for your own satisfaction, that you don't sort of get it from your own team or from what you're doing, that you feel that, I need to get it out there in the press so that the world will validate us somehow, like that we get it, the outside to validate that this is actually successful. And that's fine if that's the case, but I think you see in some companies that are really strong that's not even relevant. Like you have your own strong sense of what success is, and if you really believe in the bigger plans that you have and where they're going to go, then you don't necessarily need that like external validation.
Didn't you guys just raise a huge round of money?
I'm not really going to talk about that because it's not relevant.
That's not relevant.
No, but there's like.
Why?
No, but it's like you need a lot of pieces to put together something which is important, which is relevant. And like, for us, we're not even thinking about, an exit or anything like that. That's so, I don't know, it's just so irrelevant somehow for like what we're trying to do long term. And I think, if you're aiming for that, it means that you don't believe that you're building a large, sustainable, impactful business by yourself. IPOing a little bit different, I believe so much in like what we're doing that I'm not really interested in those paths at the moment. And I don't feel either that we need sort of that external validation from those data points either. Like I would hope, if something would happen, with another company or something like way down the line, then it would happen in the sense that it did with Zappos, where it's like, we feel that this combination is just a lot better for what we're trying to achieve. And obviously that's what most people, want to happen with an acquisition, but it's rarely the case, and it's really risky to do it. But, as long as you don't need the external validation, and as long as you sort of believe in the long-term plan of what you're doing, I don't see any need as a startup or as an entrepreneur to be focusing too much on those parts.
What's the difference between, feel free to jump in if you want to, but I'm going to keep moving through, and if you're the most interested in answering a question, just jump right in. But what's the difference between running your business in obscurity and running in your business where you're being more carefully watched, when you've had kind of a breakthrough where most people in the room know what SoundCloud is? I'm sure all of you have at times worked on something where nobody knew about it.
If I can say one thing, I think for us, once we got noticed more and once we became one of the top 10 or maybe top 5 developers on Facebook, the key thing that changed was really my grandmother took more attention because she saw me in the press and in the newspapers.
Versus your brothers and sisters?
It made my grandmother proud. I would say that was an important thing for me because when I started the company and quit my previous job and put all of my savings into VUGA, she was a little bit, are you sure? And how do you want to is that really the way how you want to live your life? And I would say besides that, it's, at least for us, we get much more requests from potential partners, right? From people who want to do something with you. And I would say one kind of key learning for me has been over the last 2 years, really hesitate and don't jump on every opportunity. Instead, become even more focused. So I thought that it would be important to focus your company on just doing like 3 things. But instead, I think you should focus your company on just doing 1 or 2 things really well. And for example, for us, we get tons of requests of integrating advertising into our games. And everybody talks about, hey, this could be an additional source of revenue, or launching in other regions, or on other portals, or doing merchandising, or selling plush toys, or so many things. And all of those stuff would add revenue, but at the same time would distract us from the core of really building a very successful big games business. And therefore, really staying focused, even if you get tons of requests, and doing almost nothing or just very few things, that I think is very important.
I mean, I would say we probably ran our business for a long time in obscurity because our target group is usually not the group that is sitting here. It's like mass market. And so we became more visible, and that was definitely the grandmother effect when we started TV advertising. But in general, what is really important is focusing on the consumer, focusing on the value proposition. And so we actually focused on 3 things. So we have our cross-platform offering, which means our own social platform. We have our games on Facebook, and we have them on mobile, on iOS, on Android. And what we found out is really focusing on this and making sure the consumer can find us wherever they are and whenever they want, really improved our metrics. So we found out users that are really going along this way, they have about like double the retention than if they would be just on one platform. And that seemed to be not an effect of PR, but rather of our product, because people knew our product, and if they go to another platform, they were just looking for it. So I think it's very important that you have a big share of mind in your target group, which might not necessarily be the group that you talk to every day, which might be different people.
Why did you decide to do television advertising?
Because the people that play on our platform, they also watch TV, and they do it at the same time sometimes, and so that was a good means.
Who has a good story about reaching an inflection point in your business, like really where you can pinpoint a moment where things changed?
Well, yeah, the big one was the one I mentioned earlier, when we switched from a disastrous product to one that's worked.
Good story. Go on.
To give a little more detail. So yeah, on the Moshi Monsters product, again, a lot of people read press articles about startups, and a lot of people assume they're like overnight hits, and they don't realize the chaos and the turmoil and the pain and the blood and the sweat and the tears that goes on behind the scenes. And for the first sort of year and a half of Moshi Monsters, nothing really happened. We were frantically trying new features and iterating and polishing and changing out stuff, and couldn't really move the needle, and it was very frustrating. And then we hit our massive tipping point in the summer of 2009, and the big kind of a penny drop moment for us was when we realized that kids love to be social. They love to share and show off and communicate just as much as grown-ups do. And if we could build a safe community and give them safe tools that allowed them to do that, we could build something akin to Facebook for an under 13 audience. And then when we started adding those features, our numbers just took off, and we started adding over 100,000 signups a day and 1 a second. And that was a kind of really exciting point. And the other one was when we launched. Moshi was a paid-for service. Parents had to buy a physical product that unlocked a code that got kids into the game, and we were getting 2 or 3 signups a day, and it was awful. And then we decided to make it completely free and worry about the commercial model later. And the day we did that, we went from a handful of signups to almost 5,000 in that first day. So that was important. Obviously, you have to make money eventually, but get the product right first. Make your audience fall in love with your product, and then it's much easier to monetize afterwards.
Well, maybe one thing I can mention is we launched our first game in summer of 2009, and on Facebook there was lots of virality, and the game took off immediately. It was at the same time when Farmville launched, and the game became huge. We had 6 million active users within a few months. And then Facebook changed its platform quite a bit on removing virality and removing many of these channels. And within 10 weeks, we dropped from 6 million active users to under 3. And it was really a steep decline. And thankfully, it was after raising our Series A, but it was really a steep decline. And what we then did is that we changed the games quite a bit, right? So the new games that were just a few weeks and months away from launch, we changed them quite a bit, and we kind of almost ignored the viral features. I mean, they were still in there, but that was not the focus. The focus really was making sure users come back over very long periods of time, really measuring user attention and user lifetime in years instead of days or weeks, and building games in such a way that they're so sustainable and so great that people really come back over years every day. And by doing that, so that was 2 years ago, we've grown more than 10-fold in that time frame, about 15-fold in that time frame. And I think the key learning and the key takeaway, maybe also for some others here in the room, is that I believe it's really important to create something that users love, that they want to kind of integrate into their life, that they want to use every day, and focus on building a user experience so that people come back all the time. And everything else, spread, viral spread, word of mouth, monetization, all of these other things will follow. If you build something that people use every day and that they love, then everything that will follow.
So worry more about retention than distribution.
Yeah, much more.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we had a similar tipping point at the time. We had been around before Facebook was there. And at the time when Facebook came, and a little later mobile, this was actually a big change for us. So we looked at it and we thought, okay, Zynga, growing nicely users, but they should first show that they can make money. And so we laid back and looked at the world. And then everything moved very quickly. And so we had to redesign our business from the ground up. We had to rethink everything anew. And that was actually a big challenge also for the culture, because we have a very strong culture, but we also had formed a little bit of this entitlement because we had been successful before. It was like, wow, we are the best and we know what to do, and let them try out. We will anyway beat them in the long run. And so this was a big learning for us, and we adjusted, and out of this came this cross-platform offering. So now we're offering Facebook games, we're offering mobile games, we integrate that all together. And I would say in the aftermath it's very important, because our company learned at a certain point to be adaptive to change. And as we know from Darwin, he said not the strongest, not the most intelligent species survive, but the most responsive to change. And so I think that has become now an important part to our culture, and so we came out stronger. And so sometimes it's good if you have these kind of challenges.
And one thing that came to mind was it wasn't a specific moment, but it was more of like a mistake that turned out to be really, really good. We on SoundCloud, we generate a waveform of the sound, so you can actually get a visual representation of what the sound is. And the reason we did that was because from the start, my co-founder Eric and I, we wanted to send sounds back and forth, and we wanted to be able to give really geeky comments inside of them, to be able to say, right at this second here, the bass is too low, or right here is a great quote, or something like that. And we needed the waveform to first have something visual that we could attach those comments to. So that whole thing of like waveforms and timed comments was basically just like an idea that Eric and I had, because we had this like really geeky behavior, and we thought, maybe somebody else would want to do that as well. So that was the reason for doing that feature. And then over time, as more and more people started using it, it became clear that that was not the point of that feature at all. Like the power of that feature of putting the comments in there is that sound, which is something you can't see, of course, you can't touch it. It's hard to hard to make it tangible. All of a sudden, because you could see it and you could also see the social activity in it, like if you see a lot of comments, you know that this is something that's engaging. All of a sudden, we turned this abstract idea of sound into something which, at a second, you could get a feeling for what it actually was, how people were interested in it. And that ended up being way more powerful than being able to say, hey, I don't like the symbol right here. And that came from just the users showing how they abused or could use that feature. So, there wasn't a given moment where we were like, oh, that's why it's important. But over time, I think that's happened, to us several times. We've just seen how people use it slightly different than we intended, and it ended up being way more powerful. Then another moment that was cool, which was maybe not changed. Maybe it didn't change the trajectory of the company, but what was a big thing for me was a month ago, basically, when my cousin, who's about to have his first child, and he's not a technical guy at all. He's awesome, but he's just not a technical guy. He sent me a SoundCloud link, a private link with just the sound of the heartbeat of his child, which is not born yet. And he's a total non-technical guy. And he sent that one to me, and I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. He managed to use it, he recorded it, he came up with this great use case of recording it, and added sort of the picture of the ultrascope to the sound, and then sent that over, which it didn't really change our metrics, but but it was a big moment for me.
The
anyway.
hot new business.
It's exactly.
Unborn children.
No, but it was his idea to do that, which I thought was so cool somehow. I'd never thought of that one.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I guess there's a couple points. On the delivering happiness side, it's kind of similar to you with sound. Happiness is a pretty abstract concept. And at the end of the day, we didn't know, we just thought we were launching a book. We had no idea what the response would be like, and then you realize there's a community built around it. There's a market for happiness. So then what do you do with that? All of a sudden you have all these people wanting more. And so it was such an interesting inflection, and the biggest inflection was that we decided to make it into an actual company, based on that, based on the response that we got. And then,
And what does the company do?
So the biggest thing for us is still the community. Excuse me, growing meaningful engagement amongst this now global community. So now we had to figure out, okay, so how are we going to actually financially support this thing? So part of it is when I was mentioning the businesses that were responding, they were saying, well, if Zappos can do that, basically use happiness as a business model, then how do we do it for our own company as well? Mm-hmm. So I don't want to call it consulting, no offense, I used to be a consultant, but we call it coaching because it's more about helping others realize, coach the coach, train the trainer, so that they can actually take what their personal core values or their own company's values and use this model of happiness and make it their own.
So you might help companies like the kinds these guys run.
Yes, yeah. So that's one side, and we also have a retail side because part of the we did this whole 3.5-month bus tour after the book launched. We bought a bus from the Dave Matthews Band. Bass player, no, Dave Matthews Band? Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's the bass player. Apparently they're doing really well still. So we took it around the country, and then we just, we made a whole bunch of stuff, tchotchkes and all that, and it was such a positive response. So part of the business is retail, part of the other business is coaching for companies. So that's on the delivering happiness side. It was just really no idea that we were going to create a company, but based on pure community and pure interaction of people that just kind of drove that passion and inspired us to keep on going. But on the Zappos side was also interesting was when I was mentioning earlier that they had to really ask themselves a question, like, what do we really want to be when we grow up? Do we really want to be known as shoes people? And so that's when they made that decision, well, actually, we want to be known as the best customer service. So that was probably one of the hardest decisions at a very young time because 40% of their sales at that point were coming from dropship. So basically the manufacturing was drop shipping to the customer, but they lost the control.
Meaning you guys didn't have a warehouse to store your own products?
There was, but not, it was like a partial, it was partial fulfillment from a warehouse and partial fulfillment from a dropship model. So, but it was at the time because the original idea was dropship. So basically it was making that decision based on a long-term view, knowing that it was the flip of a switch turning it off that 40% of your revenues are just going to be gone one day. And so I think that was really telling, because it would have pretty much sunk the company if it was the wrong decision. But because they were looking at the long term and they were building towards the value, it ended up being the right decision.
Because you could serve your customers better.
Because, once you decide that we own this customer service, we're going to provide the best we can, and then making sure every step of the way is focusing on those things that you really need to focus on.
So this might not be true of delivering happiness, but I think every other company represented up here, including Zappos, operates in really competitive markets. Like, there's a lot of other people doing games and music and retail. How do you deal with competitors, and how has that affected how you run your business?
From delivering happiness, or?
Let's maybe leave out delivering happiness, unless there's other happiness vendors out there I don't know about.
Well, it's interesting, I mean, I think we're the first probably to go this direction this far, but you would be surprised how much, I mean, after the book came out, there were so many happiness companies and gurus and, the whole, and so anyway, there is a market out there, and there actually are competitors, but so for the Zappos side, it was actually what I thought would make them so, I guess, strong in how they went about things was just they just did their own thing. They didn't really look at they didn't really look at competitors to kind of compare. And at the end of the day, they weren't basing it on, since Nordstrom's is doing this, then we should do this. So it was always, well, let's set the tone, let's set what we think is the right thing to do. So the free shipping both ways at that time on the internet was, no one would ever think about that. But it was basically thinking of, well, how do I remove all the barriers for this customer to buy shoes online? 365 days return policy. All those things that internet companies didn't do at that time was more just not based on anyone else, just more how we're going to set this, set our level of standard.
I think, if you decide to make a couple of sort of maybe non-intuitive or bolder choices, then very few people will follow you, and you'll end up without so many competitors. I mean, we've made the choice that we believe that everybody is and can be a creator, and we've made the choice that sound is a whole lot more than just the 15 million tracks on iTunes. Sound is everything around us, and not many people have followed that path in terms of trying to build something competitive. So, on one level, on a company level, like, we don't have any competitors. But you could take it up a notch and say that, of course, we have competition in terms of what people will spend their time on, like that they will, they can engage with lots of different things other than SoundCloud out there. So I think that's more of a relevant question for us. But there it turns out, and that was also a little bit by chance, it wasn't something that we thought through. It turns out that we're quite lucky in that people are quite limited in the amount of time they can spend in front of a screen these days. Like, that time is pretty packed. So if you want to take some of that time from a person, you need to take it from somebody else. Sound is something you can consume in parallel while doing lots of other things at the same time. All those hours spent in the car, people in Munich drive a lot, but there was a US study which was like insane of like how much time people spent in cars. Like, none of that time you spend playing Farmville, or none of that time is spent reading blog posts, or none of that time is spent watching YouTube videos. But all of that time can be spent listening to sounds, no matter if it's music or if it's an update from your friend or a podcast from the New Yorker. So it turns out for us that the competitive thing is about people's time and their engagement somehow through sort of mobile devices, and people being able to have their sounds follow them around, and being able to use the microphone they always have in their pocket to be able to capture things wherever they are. We can really dive into a lot of these other sort of slots throughout the day that people aren't really utilizing that much yet. And because sound is parallelizable, is that a word? Because you can consume sound in parallel, it means that we can open up like whole new slots of the day, basically.
And we really have also seen this kind of, we have defined ourselves as an entertainment company. And so games is always seen as a competition, let's say, to movies, or it's compared to the movie industry. And so we have seen, especially our kinds of games, which are very simple to play, they can always be played along the TV or the radio or the SoundCloud. Yeah. And so we have never really focused on competition. We have focused on the consumer proposition, and we have tried to make sure that we deliver the best we can in the field that we do, which was these card and board games and playing social games together. And so we gave them new values. People that lived apart and wanted to play together, they could finally play together again, and before they had to travel. And so actually they had more time now playing instead of traveling. And so generally, if you see the competition, then it's maybe because customers would actually tell you that a certain feature is missing when you're interviewing them. But that happens very seldom if you're really focused, because if you're focused very strongly on your target group, then ideally you find out what they want before your competitor does.
Well,
Social gaming is very competitive. You can't.
Are there competitors? I'm not sure. Yeah, I think a few. I think the general thing I would kind of give as advice to any entrepreneur is, if there may be things where you can learn from your competition, but don't build your company and always try to kind of imitating or building what your competitors do, right? So if you always say, oh wow, they launched something new, let's build exactly the same, you end up being always later, always slower. You don't exactly get the details that are so important to make the user experience perfect. You may end up copying something that this competitor or this other company wanted to remove since a long time, right? Because they know it's not working. So I think really when it comes to competition, focus and believe in what you do. Create something great that your users love, and obviously if there are great ideas coming out from competitors, then have a look if that also makes sense for your business. But yeah, don't build your business based on trying to run after the competitors. You will always be late. When you start being copied, or when your competitors start building everything that you add to your stuff, then that's a good sign, I think.
Why don't we start taking some audience questions? If you guys want to take this in a different direction, go for it. Let's see. Is there someone over here who can help? Go. If you want to, just raise your hand, and I'll look for it, or a mic will arrive magically. Meanwhile, there is a question. Oh, great. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Naomi from DoSomething.org. Thank you guys for your great insights. I have a question, which I'm sure delivering happiness we read as an office, so I know you touched on this a lot. But in addition to just business, success and best practices, what patterns do you guys have in your office and office culture that you think would be really beneficial for people here and at startups to develop? Because I think obviously at the end of the day, that's the most important thing: the talent and the people that you're working with.
Well, I would say just the whole concept of values, core values, and when it was adopted at Zappos, it was probably about 5 years into the company, and it sounded like a really corporate thing to do, and a lot of people thought it felt fake, because we're a startup, we should maintain that culture, but in hindsight, it actually was probably the best thing that they did to be able to establish their values and say that they're going to hire and fire based on that, because in the end, in hindsight, it was the only way they could scale, not only scale the culture, but actually make it better over time. So definitely the values, and I would say this whole concept of work-life integration, not separation or even balance. It's just this whole idea of being true to yourself, whether you're at work or at home, and bringing that to work is a true reflection of your passions, and it just gets everyone excited. It's infectious, and I can go in the studies and doing all this, but it really not just makes a better, more fun workplace, but actually increases productivity, employee engagement, friendships at work, which adds to happiness levels as well. So I think those would be the two main things.
Yeah, just to add on that, it amazes me how many companies there are in the world that are designed exactly the same, with the blue carpets and the identical lighting, and it's just bonkers for a space that we spend most of our waking hours, that our companies want us to be innovative and creative and do awesome stuff. it's absolutely shocking. So, we and many other startups spend a lot of time and a little bit of money kind of optimizing our spaces. So, we have a kitchen in the middle of the office that everyone kind of comes in and chats in the morning. We have AstroTurf on the floor. We have bright, colorful walls. We have a tree house. We put sofas in our meeting rooms. So just kind of little stuff like that doesn't break the bank, but just makes people want to spend time there and enjoy being there. And it really helps with the hiring as well when people walk in.
Maybe I can add one thing that works well for us at VUGA is we're now 140 people from 25 nations, and we've decided to have everybody in one office, in one location, all in Berlin on one floor. So not opening offices all around the world, but having everybody close together. And in this era of Skype video calls and chat and all of these other things, it's still very, very valuable to just be able to talk to someone, to just walk over, hey, what have you learned last week? We try to share information very, very publicly, also with stand-ups of, hey, a team stands up and says, hey, we have learned last week this and that. And doing that all face-to-face and in person, that works at least very well for us.
Yeah, I would agree with all of those things. I think maybe like two things that we're trying to do now. One which touches on that is to have like this extreme transparency, basically. Like what we noticed, from growing from 20 to 90 people really fast was that all information wasn't, being shared with everybody, not because that was a conscious choice, just because there wasn't mechanisms set up to actually share that. And we wanted to make it really obvious that the intention is to have everything super open, so we're like being extremely transparent about everything in the entire company now, even stuff, which is sensitive before it's sort of complete and things like that. So we're trying that out. And I think a second thing which I'm trying to encourage as much as possible is huge amounts of conflict. Seriously, just lots and lots of it, because the thing is, not like personal conflict, but conflict over real of topics, because I believe really strongly that that's one of the best ways to get to a much better result than you would without the conflict. And getting to that awesome result, getting something great out, the feeling of that just comes back, and then everybody feels great about that awesome thing that they did, which was 20% better than they ever thought it could be. And I really believe conflict is a great driver for doing that. So we're trying to make sure that is something that people are comfortable with. Sort of enticing a lot of conflict.
So I should go look for some disgruntled SoundCloud employees to tell me all your secrets, is what you're saying?
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
Just to add on the values point. So we have been 3 co-founders, and we had been very different people. So if you look at our personalities, we are extremely different. So we were even unsure whether we would be the right team to found a company. So we had very complementary skills, but we sat down and we really wrote down it was not real values, it was kind of a sketch of 30 things that we agreed upon. And so we made sure we have this kind of basis that we can grow on. And we didn't look at this until our company grew to, I would say, 150. So we didn't have a value statement, but it is proven that actually the founders, they shape the company. They determine the culture of the company very strongly. And this lasts until they leave. So they extremely strongly forge it. And so the point with the values is really to live them and to have them as a hiring criteria, but it's not necessarily to have them written on the wall until you become bigger. And we are now at the stage where we started actually trying to formulate our values, and then we found this old paper and we're like, wow, 30 values, so many. And we found out that most of them actually were the values of our team. So we asked the team, we did a big process, what are our values, and it came out, it was pretty much what we had written down there with 2 or 3 exceptions. So if you adhere to your own values, it is very likely that the company also will adhere to them in the medium term.
Are there any resources that you guys would recommend? I don't know if you like business books. Maybe we'll exempt Delivering Happiness from this answer. Everyone can agree that you'd recommend that, and then we can say something else. Is there any resource, or a website, a book, anything you would recommend?
The main reason I bought a Kindle was that nobody would see the crappy business books that I'm reading. So I'm not going to tell you any of them, apart from Delivering Happiness.
Yeah, I love business books. I think they're hugely useful, especially reading stories of other entrepreneurs who have been on adventures. So Richard Branson obviously is a great one, and Ted Turner was a good book. I think my three favorite would be the Robert Cialdini book Influence, which is fascinating about the psychology of persuasion, why people's brains work in certain ways when they're sold on something. Secondly would be The Element by Ken Robinson, which is about finding your passion and how life changes as soon as you connect with that. And the third one is just one I read recently. One of the biggest challenges for any startup is hiring amazing people. And it's called The Rare Find. And they interview hundreds of recruiters from around the world, from the military to circuses to Facebook, and figure out what they do to find those tiny proportion of employees that can make a massive difference.
So I'm actually, I'm also not the biggest fan of business books, but I read a few which were quite impressive, and I'm lucky because my co-founders, they read them a lot, so they always give me the best ones. And so what we really liked a lot was Jim Collins' From Good to Great, because it shows really how a company can grow if you want to build a company that lasts a long time. And he did a lot of studies on that, and we found many principles there very valuable. Another one is Dave Logan, which is called Tribal Leadership, where he makes this difference, or where he shows that actually the culture of organizations can have a big impact also on performance. And so, to me, or to us, the learning was really that we are on the right track with our team-focused culture, with this we culture, because it has a much higher chances that the company really grows and continues to grow. And then there was maybe a little bit more theoretical book called Competing on the Edge, which I also liked a lot, which was built by the guys that did HR at Google at the beginning, which gave a lot of examples, trying to avoid become too structured, but still being structured enough, and getting this balance as you grow, as it moves probably along the way. But I found it very interesting because you find so many applications, and actually it's all about balance now in this fast-changing world, and that was also very interesting.
So nobody has mentioned Delivering Happiness, right? So you should definitely read Delivering Happiness. And besides that, I would just recommend one thing. So we at Vuga are very driven by user experience, usability, making our games very accessible and making sure that users really understand them. And because if people have issues understanding your product or your game or your website, they will leave. And I would just recommend one book. It's called Don't Make Me Think. The title says it all, right? Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug. And if you have 4 hours, read it. And if you just have half an hour, just read that one chapter on user testing. And for really about 50 euros, you can do a user test of your website. It takes about two hours. Read Don't Make Me Think, half an hour. And after that, within 2 hours, you can do a test, and you will find awesome results and make your product much better.
Oh, I appreciate that, but I wouldn't have been offended if you didn't say Delivering Happiness.
I read it.
Oh, thanks. Actually, it's funny, the books that you mentioned were also mentioned Delivering Happiness as well, Good to Great and Tribal Leadership. And, but yeah, I actually like to steer away from business books because I'm biased. No, but because I'd like to look at the other perspectives of, I guess for me, like psychology books, and it's not necessarily books either, or magazines, etc., but actually thinking about how to keep stimulating your employees to keep on wanting to do what you're doing in new and different ways, and figuring out how to inspire them, and by really embracing who they are and trying to encourage them to grow. So I think it's more interesting when I sort of apply my sort of ways I've learned and mapped my own values, and how it really comes back to the end of the day, like, why are we doing the things that we do? I read recently, it was a blog turned into an article and turned into a book by Bronnie Ware, and it was called The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And the reason why she wrote it was because she worked in palliative care, so she worked as a hospice worker for, I think, 20-something years. And over all this time, spending time with people at their deathbed, she heard a recurring theme of the things that people regretted before they passed away. I wish I ... And the 5 top things that came out of that was, well, 3 of them that came out to me in my mind was, I wish I let myself be happier. I wish that I would have worked less. I wish I would have connected more with my friends and my relationships. And the number one thing is I wish that I had been true to myself and not led the life that others had wanted me to lead. And at the end of the day, it's coming back to who you really are and making sure those things shine. So I guess in any setting, whether it's work or personal relationships, I just kind of had that on top of my mind.
Man, when your business is happiness, you can just kind of take the conversation in a different direction. Do we have any more audience questions? We have a couple minutes left. Go ahead.
It looks like 3 of the 5 companies are based in Berlin. This is Boris from Game Duel also. Looks as 3 of the 5 companies here based in Berlin. So is this a secret source of success, or?
Yes.
Maybe Marcel likes
happening
Berlin.
there?
I don't know.
It definitely.
Secret sauce of being chosen for this panel.
The flight connections are good. I don't know.
It definitely is. I think Klaus Hommels actually presented a bunch of deep data on why Berlin is the best startup city in Europe earlier today. So I didn't hear that, but I'm looking forward to get some more data to support my arguments.
And Alex, you have been on like half a dozen panels in the last few weeks on kind of what's the best startup city, right?
Yeah, with you, right?
So, well, we both recommend Berlin, but I
Very
think
much so.
in the end, I think the city is not kind of that will not kind of make it or break it for you. If you're passionate, you can, I think these days, found a startup everywhere. But I personally think that Berlin is kind of special at the moment, creative, international, affordable. So I would recommend going there, but you don't have to.
I mean, the city is completely punk and counterculture, doing things your own way, and ultimately I think that's a lot of what a startup is. Doing stuff differently that it hasn't been done before and doing it your own way. So if you don't want to be seen as a crazy freak, then move to Berlin. Like, I think that's...
I was excited to go visit all of you in Berlin, and then I heard you were at DLD this week, so.
East London is pretty good as well, so I just want to give a shout out for Shoreditch.
I agree. I agree. We have an office there as well.
We should change the topic of this panel now. And
Did you? Go ahead.
Actually, Jen, related to happiness and companies and cities, I know that I've read that you guys in Las Vegas are now giving back and really working from your company and taking that spirit to transforming the city. Can you talk a little bit about what you guys are doing, you know, mentioning Berlin, now on Vegas, what you guys are doing to kind of spread the ideas and the themes?
Right. Just giving a little shout out to Vegas. Thanks. I'm actually, and so Zappos is in Vegas, and Delivering Happiness is in the Bay Area, which is actually in a tiny little town called Emeryville. That's where Pixar is. That's the only thing we have. But Vegas, yeah. So it's really interesting. About a year and a half ago, Zappos decided to take over the old City Hall in downtown Vegas as their new campus. And if anyone's been to downtown Vegas, it's not, you know, the place where you want to stroll in the middle of the night. It's just, you know, it just has that kind of reputation for a reason. But after that decision was made, there was a realization that, you know, there's culture within a company, but by moving Zappos into downtown, it was actually going to revitalize the area around it. So why not integrate Zappos culture within the community, like the local culture as well? So that's when the whole idea of, like, you remember Austin and was, you know, 5-10 years ago, and how it was totally different from what it was today. So it's almost doing kind of what Austin did, but in a shorter time frame. So the whole project is to not just rebuild the campus, but like, you know, planting a new campus in a city. It's really, how do we integrate so that it's almost like Cheers, where you have impromptu meetings at the local bar or at the local eatery, and just encouraging people to, whether it's Zappos employees or locals, to pursue their own passion as part of the revitalization of, let's say there's a Zappos employee that's always wanted to be a baker, so that they would encourage that, so that it'd be part of, like, integrated into the downtown scene, and actually have part of that in terms of returning the, you know, economic returns back into the city itself. So it's a really huge project, and it's really exciting to think that of all the cities in the world, like one that's known to bring sin. We have a little catchphrase that we're turning Sin City to Sim City, because it really is like playing Sim City, but in real life. It's incredible. So yeah, if you've seen it today, in a few years from now, even every time I go back, there's more energy, there's more people walking around the cafes, and it's going to be a different place. So it's pretty exciting.
So San Francisco's really awesome.
Yes. Absolutely.
And there's no companies there, so you should come.
It's always helpful.
Honestly, where our office is, it feels like walking down the street. You're in a high school or something. You know, I mean, it's insane. Anyways, I really appreciate all of you coming, and I'm glad we got to explore such a range of topics. And thank you so much for being on this panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.